Hello everyone, welcome back. This is a story from Her Silent Revenge, and it has taken a turn you absolutely didn't expect. Let's begin.
Right after my husband's funeral ended and the last guests were leaving the church, his assistant suddenly approached me. He glanced around, then quietly slipped a sealed yellow envelope into my hand. On the front, there was only my name written in my husband's handwriting. He lowered his voice, careful and tense. "Don't open it here. And listen to me. Don't tell anyone in your family." 2 hours later, I sat alone at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Within seconds of seeing what was inside, my hands began to shake. In that moment, I realized some secrets are far more terrifying than death itself. Welcome back to the channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me which country you're tuning in from. I always enjoy hearing from viewers around the world. Just a heads up, what you're about to hear is a fictional narrative with heightened elements crafted for storytelling purposes and to explore important themes. While names and settings are invented, the lessons woven throughout are deeply impactful. I flew home from Germany after 15 hours in the air. I didn't sleep, not for 1 second. My husband was dead. It was Monday morning, February 10th, 2025, a few minutes past 10, and I was standing in the back of St. Michael's Church on Southwest Mill Street in Portland, Oregon. The pews were full. The air smelled like lilies and old wood and grief. At the front of the sanctuary, a closed casket rested beneath a photograph of Brennan, my Brennan smiling in a flannel shirt holding a cup of coffee. Looking exactly like the man I'd kissed goodbye 8 months ago when I deployed to Ramstein Air Base. The death certificate said cardiac arrest, sudden, unexplained. He was 41 years old. I stood near the back door in my dress blues, my hands clasped in front of me, and tried to keep my face still. People kept glancing at me, friends, co-workers, neighbors, but no one seemed to know what to say to a wife who'd flown halfway across the world to bury a man who shouldn't have been dead. My parents sat in the second row. My father, Walter, was 69, a retired mechanical engineer with shoulders that had started to stoop in the last few years. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, staring at nothing. My mother, Lorraine, 66, a retired librarian who'd always been the one to hold our family together, was crying silently into a tissue. I wanted to go to them. I didn't move. In the front row on the other side of the aisle sat my older brother, Garrett, and his wife, Fallon. Garrett was 48, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and a jaw that had always reminded me of our father's. He owned a real estate brokerage in Northeast Portland and had always been the one everyone in the family turned to for advice. Today, though, he looked smaller somehow. His hands were shaking. Fallon, his wife of 12 years, sat beside him in a black dress, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She was 43, a nurse at Providence Street. Vincent, and she'd always been kind to me in that quiet, careful way some people are. But today, neither of them had looked me in the eye. Not once. I'd hugged them both outside the church before the service started. Garrett had put his arms around me and said, "I'm so sorry, Corinne. I'm so sorry." But his voice had been flat, mechanical, and when I pulled back, I saw that his hands were trembling. Fallon had squeezed my hand and whispered, "If you need anything at all, please call us." But she'd looked past me when she said it, like she couldn't quite meet my gaze. I told myself I was reading too much into it. People grieve in different ways. Maybe Garrett was in shock. Maybe Fallon was just exhausted. But something about the way they held themselves stiff, careful like they were afraid to move too quickly, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I scanned the room. Most of the faces were familiar. Brennan's co-workers from TechWave Solutions, the software firm where he'd worked as a senior engineer for the past 6 years. A few of his buddies from his weekly poker group. Our neighbors from Maple Ridge Drive, the quiet street in Northwest Portland where Brennan and I had bought our first house 3 years ago, back when I was still stateside, before the Air Force sent me to Germany. And then I saw him, Quinlan Barrett. He was standing off to the side near the stained glass window that overlooked the parking lot. He was 29, lean and sharp-featured, with dark hair that fell over his forehead and eyes that always seemed a little too watchful. He'd been Brennan's assistant at TechWave for the past 2 years, some kind of project coordinator or technical liaison. I couldn't remember the exact title. Brennan had mentioned him a few times in our video calls, said he was smart, reliable, kept his head down and got things done. Right now, Quinlan was staring at me, not in the way most people were sad, uncomfortable, unsure. He was staring at me like he was trying to tell me something, like he was waiting for me to see him. I held his gaze for a moment. He didn't look away. Then slowly he glanced toward the back exit and then back at me. A signal. I frowned. What the hell? The service began. Pastor Edmund Reeves, a man in his mid-50s with silver hair and a voice like warm honey, stood at the pulpit and spoke about Brennan's kindness, his brilliance, his love for his family. He talked about how Brennan had volunteered at a local youth coding camp every summer, how he'd never missed a Sunday dinner with my parents when I was deployed, how he'd written me letters every week even though we could video chat anytime. I barely heard any of it. All I could think was Brennan was 41. He didn't smoke. He didn't drink. He ran 3 miles every morning before work. 6 months ago, he'd passed his annual physical with flying colors. How does a man like that just drop dead of a heart attack? I kept replaying the phone call I'd gotten 4 days ago. It had been my father's voice on the other end, shaking, barely able to get the words out. Corinne, sweetheart. Brennan's gone. He collapsed at home. They tried to revive him, but I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. I'd hung up and stared at the wall of my quarters in Germany for 3 hours before I could even cry. Now, standing in this church, I felt like I was watching the whole thing from outside my own body, like this was happening to someone else. The service ended just after 11:30. People filed out slowly, shaking hands, hugging, murmuring condolences. I stood by the door and accepted them all with nods and quiet thank yous. My father put his arm around my mother and guided her toward the parking lot. Garrett and Fallon slipped out a side door without saying goodbye, and then Quinlan was in front of me. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, hands in the pockets of his dark suit, looking at me with those sharp, careful eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something urgent. "Thank you," I said. He glanced around, making sure no one was close enough to hear. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. It was sealed. My name was written on the front in Brennan's handwriting. My heart stopped. "He wanted you to have this." Quinlan said, his voice barely above a whisper, "If anything ever happened to him." I stared at the envelope. "What is this?" "I don't know. He never told me." Quinlan's eyes flicked toward the parking lot, then back to me. "But he told me to give it to you if he died. And he told me to tell you to meet me at 3 o'clock this afternoon, at his office, TechWave Solutions downtown, 12th floor." What I asked. Quinlan's jaw tightened. "Because there's something Brennan wanted you to know." He pressed the envelope into my hand, turned, and walked away before I could say another word. I stood there in the empty church holding the envelope, and for the first time since I'd gotten the call 4 days ago, I felt something other than grief. I felt afraid. By 2 in the afternoon, I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table in Beaverton, staring at the sealed envelope Quinlan had given me. The house was quiet. My mother had gone upstairs to lie down after we'd driven home from the church. My father was in the garage doing what he always did when he didn't know how to process something, organizing tools he'd already organized 100 times before. I turned the envelope over in my hands. Brennan's handwriting was unmistakable. Corinne. That was all it said on the front. Just my name written in blue ink, slightly smudged at the corner like he'd been in a hurry. I peeled open the flap. Inside were 4 pieces of paper folded together. I pulled them out and spread them across the table. The first was a bank statement. Not mine, not Brennan's either, at least not one I recognized. It was from Columbia Bank, dated over the last 3 months. 6 transactions were highlighted in yellow. Transfers, each one between $200 and $8,000. They added up to $35,000 total. The account number at the top belonged to Brennan. The receiving account number didn't look familiar at first, but then I saw the names listed at the bottom of the page, Walter and Lorraine Calloway, my parents. I stared at it. Why would Brennan transfer $35,000 to my parents without telling me? The second document was a life insurance policy, $850,000. The policyholder was Brennan Mercer. The primary beneficiary was listed as Corinne Mercer, 70%. The contingent beneficiary listed at 30% was Garrett Calloway. My brother, I read it twice, then a third time. Brennan had never mentioned this policy to me. We talked about life insurance once, maybe 2 years ago, but we'd never actually bought one, or at least I thought we hadn't. The third document was a handwritten note. Brennan's handwriting again, messier this time, like he'd written it in a rush. It said, "Garrett is pressuring me. He wants the insurance money. I think he's going to kill me." My hands started shaking. The fourth document was a lab report. Private testing dated February 5th, 5 days before Brennan died. The header read, "Health Span Labs, Confidential Blood Analysis." Halfway down the page, one result was circled in red pen. Arsenic AS, 185 micrograms per liter. Reference range, less than 10 micrograms per liter. I read it again, then a fourth time. Arsenic. Brennan had arsenic in his blood, 18 times the normal level. I sat back in the chair, my chest tight, my head spinning. This didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Garrett was my brother. He'd held me when I cried after my first breakup in high school. He'd walked me down the aisle at my wedding because our father had been recovering from knee surgery. He was the person I called when I needed advice when I didn't know what to do. And Brennan thought Garrett was trying to kill him. No, I couldn't believe that. I wouldn't. But the documents were right there in front of me. The bank transfers, the insurance policy, the note, the arsenic test. I folded the papers back up, shoved them into the envelope, and grabbed my keys. TechWave Solutions was downtown on the 12th floor of a glass and steel building on Southwest Jefferson Street. I'd been there once before 2 years ago when Brennan had invited me to his company's holiday party. Back then, the office had felt bright and busy, full of people typing at standing desks and laughing over coffee in the break room. Today, it felt like a tomb. I stepped off the elevator just after 3. The receptionist, a young woman with red hair and a name tag that said Jenna, looked up at me with sad eyes. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "Everyone here loved Brennan." "Thank you," I said. My voice sounded far away. "I'm here to see Quinlan Barrett." She nodded and picked up the phone. A minute later, Quinlan appeared from a hallway to the left. He was still wearing the dark suit from the funeral, but he'd loosened his tie. He looked tired. "Follow me," he said. He led me through a maze of cubicles to a small conference room at the back of the office. The door had a frosted glass window with the word "Private" stenciled across it. He closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit. I didn't. I put the envelope on the table and looked at him. "What the hell is this?" I asked. Quinlan's jaw tightened. "Brennan gave that to me 3 weeks ago. He told me if anything ever happened to him, I needed to get it to you. And I needed to tell you not to trust anyone in your family. Why didn't he go to the police?" "He didn't trust them." Quinlan crossed his arms. He said, "If something happened, it would look like an accident." He said the only people who could help were the FBI. "The FBI?" I stared at him. "You're telling me Brennan thought someone was trying to kill him, and he didn't go to the police. Didn't tell me, didn't tell anyone except you." "He was scared," Quinlan said. "And he didn't have proof. Not enough anyway, not yet." I sat down. My legs felt weak. "What do you mean, not yet?" Quinlan pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and handed it to me. On the screen was an email draft. The recipient line was blank. The subject line said, "If you're reading this, I'm dead." The body of the email was short. "Corinne, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. I set this email to send automatically if I don't log into my account for 7 consecutive days. By the time you get it, you'll know what to do. The USB drive is in your parents' safe. The code is 08-17-2018. Give it to the FBI. Trust Quinlan. Trust no one else. I love you. B." I stared at the screen. "When does this send?" 7 days after his last login. Quinlan said, "He died on Thursday night, February 6th. Today is Monday the 10th. That means the email goes out on Thursday, February 13th. 4 days from now. And you don't know what's on the USB drive." "No, he never told me. He just said it was evidence." Quinlan took the phone back and slipped it into his pocket. "But he told me to make sure you waited for the email. He said it was important." I stood up, pacing the small room. My mind was racing. Garrett, the insurance money, the arsenic, the USB drive, the email. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Quinlan met my eyes. Because Brennan was a good man, and because someone killed him. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded. "Okay," I said. "I'll wait for the email." Quinlan walked me back to the elevator. Before the doors closed, he said one more thing. "Be careful, Corinne. If Brennan was right, whoever did this is still out there, and they don't know you're looking yet." The doors slid shut, and I rode down alone, the envelope clutched in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. 4 more days. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table in my parents' house in Beaverton, staring at the 4 documents Brennan had left me, reading them over and over until the words blurred together. By 3 in the morning, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to wait 4 more days for an email. I was going to the FBI. At 7, I showered, put on jeans and a clean sweater, and drove into Portland. The city was still waking up, coffee shops just opening, commuters inching through traffic on the freeway. I kept my hands tight on the wheel and my eyes on the road. I didn't let myself think too much. If I did, I'd lose my nerve. The FBI Portland field office sat on the northeast edge of the city off Cascades Parkway in a low, blocky building that looked more like a corporate headquarters than a federal law enforcement facility. I parked in the visitor lot, walked through the glass doors, and told the security officer at the front desk that I needed to speak to someone about a homicide. He looked at me for a long moment, then picked up the phone. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a windowless conference room on the 3rd floor, the envelope spread out in front of me, waiting. The door opened and a man stepped in. He was in his late 40s, tall and lean, with graying hair cut short and sharp blue eyes that took in everything at once. He wore a dark suit, no tie, and a badge clipped to his belt. He closed the door behind him and extended his hand. "Special Agent Holden Voss," he said. His voice was calm, measured. "I understand you have information about a possible homicide." I shook his hand and sat back down. "My husband died 5 days ago. The death certificate says cardiac arrest, but I don't think that's what killed him." Voss sat across from me and pulled a notepad from his jacket pocket. "Tell me why." I slid the 4 documents across the table. He picked them up one by one, reading carefully. His expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten when he got to the arsenic test. "Where did you get these?" he asked. "My husband gave them to his assistant before he died. The assistant gave them to me yesterday at the funeral." Voss set the papers down and looked at me. "Your husband's name was Brennan Mercer. You're Corinne Mercer. And your brother is Garrett Calloway." "Yes." "And you believe your brother poisoned your husband for an $850,000 life insurance payout?" I nodded. My throat felt tight. "I don't want to believe it, but the evidence is right there." Voss leaned back in his chair, his eyes still on me. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm not going to lie to you. This is strong circumstantial evidence. The arsenic test, the insurance policy, the handwritten note, all of it points to foul play. But it's not enough to make an arrest. Not yet. Why not? Because we don't have proof that your brother administered the poison. We don't have a murder weapon. We don't have a witness. And we don't have a confirmed cause of death. The medical examiner ruled it cardiac arrest. To reopen the case, we'd need to exhume the body and run a full toxicology screen. That takes time and a court order. I stared at him. "So you're saying there's nothing you can do?" "I'm saying we need more." Voss tapped the lab report. "This blood test is private. It's not admissible in court unless we can verify the chain of custody. And even if we could, it only proves your husband had arsenic in his system. It doesn't prove your brother put it there." "What about the note?" I asked. "Brennan wrote that Garrett was pressuring him, that he thought Garrett was going to kill him." "That's hearsay. It's useful, but it's not proof." Voss folded his hands on the table. "What we need is the rest of the evidence your husband collected. You said there's a USB drive." "Yes, he left instructions in an email. It's set to send automatically in 3 days if he doesn't log into his account. 3 days from now. Thursday, February 13th. Voss nodded slowly. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to wait for that email. When it comes, you're going to retrieve the USB drive and bring it to me. In the meantime, I'm going to assign 2 agents to start building a financial profile on your brother. If he's in debt, if he's made unusual purchases, if he's been in contact with anyone suspicious, we'll find it." He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text. A moment later, the door opened and 2 people stepped in. The first was a woman in her mid-30s with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and sharp, watchful eyes. She wore a black blazer and slacks and a sidearm holstered at her hip. Voss gestured toward her. "This is Special Agent Tessa Lang. She's our lead surveillance specialist. If we need eyes on your brother, she'll handle it." Tessa gave me a brief nod. "Ma'am." The second was a man in his early 40s, stocky and broad-shouldered with close-cropped brown hair and glasses. He carried a tablet under one arm. Voss nodded toward him. "And this is Special Agent Cruz Hamilton, Financial Crimes and Forensic Accounting. If there's money involved, Cruz will track it." Cruz stepped forward and shook my hand. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I said quietly. Voss stood. "Here's what you need to understand. If your brother is responsible for your husband's death, he's dangerous. And if he thinks you're looking into it, he's going to get nervous. So until we have enough evidence to bring him in, you need to act normal. Don't confront him. Don't ask him questions. Don't let him know you suspect anything." I swallowed. "What if he calls me?" "Then you answer. You sound sad. You sound tired, but you don't sound suspicious." Voss's eyes were steady on mine. "Can you do that?" I nodded. "Yes." "Good." He handed me a business card with his name and a phone number printed on it. "If anything happens, anything that makes you feel unsafe, you call me. Day or night." I took the card and slipped it into my pocket. Voss walked me back to the elevator. Before the doors closed, he said one more thing. "We're going to find out what happened to your husband, Mrs. Mercer. I promise you that." I nodded and the doors slid shut. I drove back to Beaverton in a daze. My hands were shaking on the wheel. My mind kept replaying Voss's words. Don't confront him. Don't let him know you suspect anything. I pulled into my parents' driveway just after 11. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. Garrett. I stared at his name for a long moment. Then I answered. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Corinne, where have you been?" His voice was tight, almost frantic. "I called you twice this morning. I was worried." "I'm fine, Garrett. I just needed some space." Space. He exhaled sharply. "Em, you just lost your husband. You shouldn't be alone right now. Fallon and I can come over. We can help." "I don't need help," I said. My hand was trembling. "I just need time." There was a long pause. Then Garrett said, "Okay, but call me if you need anything, please." "I will." I hung up and sat in the car, my phone still in my hand, my heart hammering in my chest. He sounded scared. By 8:30 that evening, Garrett Calloway was on his third glass of whiskey. He sat on the leather couch in the living room of his house on Hillcrest Avenue, a 2-story craftsman with a view of the West Hills, and stared at the phone in his hand. The call with Corinne had ended 20 minutes ago, but he couldn't stop replaying it in his head. Her voice had been too calm, too controlled. She didn't sound like a woman who'd just buried her husband. She sounded like a woman who was watching, waiting. Across the room, Fallon stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself. She was still in the black dress she'd worn to the funeral that morning, but she'd kicked off her heels hours ago. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail and her face was pale. She'd barely said a word since they'd gotten home. Garrett took another sip of whiskey and set the glass down hard on the coffee table. The sound made Fallon flinch. "Did Quinlan say anything to her?" he asked. Fallon turned to look at him. "I don't know. I didn't hear them talking. But you saw them at the church after the service. I saw Quinlan hand her something. An envelope, I think." Fallon's voice was tight. "And I saw the way she looked at us during the funeral. She didn't look sad, Garrett. She looked suspicious." Garrett swore under his breath and stood up, pacing to the window. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows across the quiet residential block. Everything looked normal, peaceful, but inside his chest felt like it was caving in. "We can't let her investigate," he said. "If she goes to the cops, if she goes to the FBI, we're done." "Maybe she won't," Fallon said quietly. Maybe she'll just grieve and move on. Garrett turned to look at her, his eyes hard. Do you really believe that? Fallon didn't answer. Garrett crossed the room and poured himself another drink. His hands were shaking. He thought about the phone call again. Corinne had said she needed time, that she was fine, but she wasn't fine. He knew his sister. She was a sergeant in the Air Force. She'd been trained to stay calm under pressure, to think strategically, to solve problems. And right now, Brennan's death was a problem she was trying to solve. He drained the glass in one swallow and slammed it down on the bar cart. This wasn't supposed to happen, he muttered. Fallon crossed her arms tighter. You said it would look like an accident. You said no one would suspect anything. I know what I said. Then why is Corinne asking questions? Because Brennan was smarter than I thought. Garrett's voice was bitter. He turned to face her. He must have left something behind. Something for Corinne. That's the only explanation. Fallon's face went pale. What do you mean, something? Garrett didn't answer right away. His mind was racing, trying to piece it together. Brennan had been acting strange in the weeks before he died. Quiet, paranoid. He'd stopped coming to family dinners, stopped answering Garrett's calls. At the time, Garrett had chalked it up to stress. Brennan had been working long hours at TechWave, dealing with some big project. But now, looking back, Garrett realized the truth. Brennan had known, or at least he'd suspected. Garrett sank back down onto the couch and put his head in his hands. The memories came flooding back, sharp and jagged. It had started 18 months ago. Garrett had always liked to gamble, nothing serious at first, just poker nights with friends, the occasional trip to the casino. But then he'd discovered online betting, sports, horses, high-stakes poker tournaments streamed live from Vegas. It was easy, too easy, and for a while he'd won. But then the wins stopped, and the losses piled up. By last summer, he'd burned through $280,000. Money he didn't have. Money he'd borrowed from the wrong people. The loan sharks, local guys connected to a larger network out of Seattle, had given him 3 months to pay it back. When he couldn't, they'd started making threats. Not just against him, against Fallon, against Evan, their 8-year-old son. Garrett had panicked. He'd taken $150,000 from TechWave Solutions, where he sat on the board as a minority investor. He'd buried it in fake consulting fees routed through shell companies he'd set up offshore. It had bought him time, but it wasn't enough. He still owed $130,000, and the sharks were getting impatient. That's when he'd thought of the insurance policy. Brennan had been family. A good guy. A little naive, maybe, but smart. Garrett had taken him out for drinks one night in November, gotten him drunk, and convinced him to sign a life insurance application. $850,000. Primary beneficiary, Corinne. Contingent beneficiary, Garrett. Brennan had been too wasted to ask questions, and Fallon, who worked as a nurse at Providence Street. Vincent had forged the signature of Brennan's primary care physician on the medical clearance form. The plan had been simple. Brennan would die in accident, a heart attack, something that wouldn't raise suspicions. Corinne was deployed in Germany. She wouldn't be back in the States for months. After 90 days, if the primary beneficiary didn't claim the payout, the money would go to the contingent. Garrett would collect pay off the sharks and walk away clean. But Brennan had started asking questions, and then he'd gotten a private blood test, and now Corinne was asking questions too. Garrett looked up at Fallon. We need to know what Brennan left behind. If he wrote something down, if he recorded something, we need to find it before Corinne does. Fallon's eyes were wide. Garrett, we don't have a choice. His voice was sharp. Do you know what the mafia will do if we don't pay them? They know where Evan goes to school, Fallon. They know his bus route. They know what time you pick him up every day. Fallon's face crumpled. She sank into the armchair by the window, her hands covering her face. I didn't want this, she whispered. I didn't want any of this. Neither did I. Garrett stood and walked to the window, his jaw clenched. But we're in it now, and the only way out is to make sure Corinne doesn't find anything. Fallon looked up at him, her eyes red. What are you saying? Garrett didn't answer. He just stared out at the dark street, his mind churning. Corinne was a threat. She was smart, trained, relentless. If she kept digging, she'd find the truth. And if she went to the FBI, it was over. He turned back to Fallon. We need to be careful. We need to act like we're grieving, like we're supporting her. And if she asks questions, we need to make sure she doesn't get answers. Fallon stared at him. And if that's not enough, Garrett's expression hardened. Then we do whatever it takes. I didn't know any of that at the time. I didn't know Garrett was sitting in his living room drinking whiskey, trying to figure out how to stop me. I didn't know he was scared. I didn't know he was planning his next move. But sitting in my car outside my parents' house that night, staring at my phone, replaying the sound of his voice in my head, I was worried I knew one thing for certain. My brother was afraid, and that meant he had something to hide. The next 2 days were hell. I checked my email every hour, sometimes every half hour. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, reach for my phone, and stare at the empty inbox until my eyes burned. Nothing. No automated message from Brennan, no answers, just silence. Wednesday morning, I woke up on the narrow twin bed in my childhood bedroom, the same room I'd slept in from age 6 to 18. The walls were still pale yellow. The bookshelf was still crowded with old paperbacks and trophies from high school track meets. A framed photo of Brennan and me on our wedding day sat on the nightstand. We were laughing in the picture, his arm around my waist, my head tilted against his shoulder. I'd taken that photo with me to Germany and brought it back in my luggage 5 days ago. I picked it up and stared at it. Brennan's smile, his eyes, the way he'd looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. I set the photo down and checked my email again. Nothing. Downstairs, my father was at the kitchen table drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. "Morning, sweetheart," he said quietly. "Morning, Dad." He watched me pour myself a cup of coffee. "You sleep okay?" I nodded. It was a lie. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night since the funeral. "You doing all right?" he asked. "You seem distracted." I sat down across from him and wrapped my hands around the warm mug. "I'm just trying to sort through Brennan's paperwork. Bank accounts, insurance, all that stuff. It's a lot." My father nodded slowly. "If you need help, I've got it," I said, maybe a little too quickly. "But thank you." He didn't push. He just went back to his newspaper, and I sat there staring at nothing, feeling the weight of the lie pressing down on my chest. My mother came downstairs a few minutes later. She looked smaller than I remembered, like grief had physically shrunk her. She moved slowly, mechanically pouring herself tea and sitting at the far end of the table. She didn't say anything. She just stared out the window at the backyard, her hands wrapped around the teacup. I wanted to go to her. I wanted to put my arms around her and tell her everything about the documents, the arsenic test, the insurance policy, Garrett. But I couldn't. Not yet. If I told her now, she'd fall apart, and I needed her to stay strong, just a little longer. So I sat there sipping my coffee and said nothing. By Wednesday afternoon, Garrett had called me 3 times. I didn't answer the first 2. I let them go to voicemail and deleted the messages without listening. But the third time, just after 2 o'clock, I knew I couldn't ignore him anymore. If I did, he'd get suspicious. Or worse, he'd show up at my parents' house. I answered on the 4th ring. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Corinne." He sounded relieved. "I've been trying to reach you." "I know, I've been busy." "Busy with what?" I closed my eyes. "Paperwork, Brennan's accounts. I'm trying to figure out what needs to be done." There was a pause. Then Garrett said, "You shouldn't be doing that alone. Let me help. Fallon and I can come over." "I don't need help." "Corinne." I said, "I don't need help, Garrett." My voice was sharper than I meant it to be. I took a breath and softened my tone. I need space. Please." Another pause, longer this time. "Okay," he said finally. "But if you need anything, I'll call you." I hung up before he could say anything else. My hands were shaking. I sat down on the edge of my bed and stared at my phone. A moment later, it buzzed. A text message. It was from Special Agent Voss. "Stay calm. Don't let him know you're suspicious. We're monitoring the situation." I typed back, "How are you monitoring?" His reply came a minute later. "We have eyes on his house. If he makes a move, we'll know." I exhaled slowly. The FBI was watching Garrett. That should have made me feel safer, but it didn't. It just made everything feel more real. Thursday dragged by even slower than Wednesday. I spent most of the day in my room pretending to sort through files on my laptop, but really just refreshing my email over and over. My mother knocked on my door around noon and asked if I wanted lunch. I told her I wasn't hungry. She left a sandwich outside my door anyway. I ate it mechanically, tasting nothing. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I went downstairs and told my parents I was going for a drive. My father looked concerned, but he didn't try to stop me. I got in my car and drove aimlessly through Beaverton, then into Portland, past the river, past the bridges, past the neighborhoods where Brennan and I used to walk on Sunday mornings. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to move. I ended up parked in the lot of a grocery store on Southeast Hawthorne, staring at my phone, willing the email to come. It didn't. At 6, I drove back to my parents' house. My mother had made dinner: pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans. It smelled like home, like comfort. But when I sat down at the table, I couldn't eat. I pushed the food around on my plate and answered my parents' questions in monosyllables until my father finally stopped asking. After dinner, I went back upstairs. My mother stood at the bottom of the stairs and called after me, "Corinne." I stopped and turned. Her eyes were full of tears. "I know you're hurting, but you don't have to do this alone." I nodded. "I know, Mom." But I couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. That night, I lay in bed with the lights off, staring at the ceiling. The photo of Brennan and me sat on the nightstand, barely visible in the dim glow of the streetlight outside. I reached over and picked it up, tracing the outline of his face with my thumb. "I miss you," I whispered. The room was silent. I set the photo down and picked up my phone. Still no email. I checked the time. 11:47 p.m. Thursday, February 13th. Tomorrow was Friday the 14th. 7 days since Brennan had died. 7 days since his last login. Tomorrow the email would come. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. But all I could think about was what I'd find when I opened it. What Brennan had left behind. What he wanted me to know. And whether it would be enough to prove that my brother had killed him. My phone buzzed at 7:32 on Friday morning. I was still in bed, staring at the ceiling, already awake. I'd been awake since 5. I grabbed the phone off the nightstand and looked at the screen. One new email from Brennan Mercer, subject: "If you're reading this, I'm dead." My heart stopped. I sat up, my hands shaking, and opened the message. "Corinne, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. I set this email to send automatically if I don't log into my account for 7 consecutive days. By the time you get it, you'll know something's wrong. The USB drive is in your parents' safe. The code is 08-17-2018. That's the day I proposed to you. Do you remember we were at Cannon Beach and I got down on one knee in the sand and you said yes before I even finished asking? Everything you need is on that drive. Give it to the FBI. Don't trust the police. Don't trust anyone in your family. Just the FBI. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I was scared. I thought if I told you, they'd come after you too. But if you're reading this, it means they got to me first. I love you, Corinne. I always will. B. I read it twice, then a third time. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a band around my ribs and pulled it until I couldn't breathe. I threw off the covers, grabbed a sweatshirt, and ran downstairs. My parents were in the kitchen. My father sat at the table with a cup of coffee and the morning paper. My mother stood at the stove, scrambling eggs. They both looked up when I came in. "Corinne," my mother said, "are you okay?" I didn't answer. I crossed the room and stopped in front of my father. "Dad, I need to get into the safe." He frowned. "The safe, why? Brennan left something in there. I need it." My mother turned off the stove. "What did he leave?" "I don't know, but he told me where to find it." I looked at my father. "Please, Dad, I need to open it now." He set down his coffee and stood. "All right, come on." He led me down the hall to his office, a small room lined with bookshelves and filing cabinets. In the corner, behind a framed photo of our family at the coast, was a wall safe. My father pulled the photo aside and entered the code. The door swung open. Inside were a few stacks of papers, some old jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother, and a small black USB drive with a white label on it. The label said, "For Corinne, FBI only." I reached in and took it. My hands were trembling. "What is that?" my father asked. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm about to find out." I went back upstairs to my room, closed the door, and sat down at the small desk by the window. I opened my laptop, plugged in the USB drive, and waited. 5 files appeared on the screen. I opened the first one. File 1 audio recording. The file was labeled Garrett_confession_ November 14th .mp3. I clicked play. At first there was nothing but static. Then I heard voices. 2 of them. One was Garrett. The other was Fallon. Garrett's voice was slurred like he'd been drinking. I'm in deep Fallon. 280,000. The guys I borrowed from, they're not messing around. They know where we live. They know where Evan goes to school. Fallon's voice was quieter, scared. What are we going to do? I don't know. I took 150 from TechWave, but it's not enough. I still owe 130. Garrett, that's embezzlement. If they find out, they won't. I buried it. But we need more. We need the insurance money. What insurance money? Brennan's. I got him to sign a policy. 850,000. If he dies, Corinne gets 70%. But she's in Germany. After 90 days, it goes to the contingent. That's me. There was a long pause. Then Fallon said, You're talking about killing him. I'm talking about surviving. The recording ended. I sat there frozen, my hands clenched into fists. File 2, bank screenshots, 6 images. Each one showed a transfer from Brennan's account to my parents' joint account. $35,000 total. The dates ranged from November to January. File 3 video. The file was labeled final_message.mp4. I double-clicked it. Brennan appeared on the screen. He was sitting in his home office, the one with the big window that looked out onto the street. But he looked different. Thinner. Tired. His skin was pale and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked into the camera and spoke. Corinne, if you're watching this, I'm dead, and Garrett and Fallon killed me. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and continued. I've been sick for weeks. Nausea, headaches, exhaustion. I thought it was stress. But then I started noticing things. Garrett was coming over more often. Fallon kept bringing me drinks, protein shakes, smoothies. She said they'd help me feel better, but I only got worse. So I went to a private lab. I paid cash, didn't use insurance. The results came back 2 days ago. Arsenic. 185 micrograms per liter. Someone's been poisoning me. I confronted Garrett. Not directly, I'm not stupid. But I asked him about the life insurance policy. He got defensive, angry. That's when I knew. I've collected everything I can. Audio recordings, financial records, IP logs showing Garrett accessing your parents' bank account from his laptop, receipts for the deepfake software he used to forge your dad's voice, and a receipt for a chemical supply website where he bought arsenic trioxide under a fake name. I was going to take all of this to the FBI, but if you're watching this, it means I didn't make it in time. He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes red. Don't let your parents get blamed for this. Garrett used their account to launder money, but they didn't know. I've proven that. It's all in the files. I love you, Corinne. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, but now it's your turn. Finish this. Make them pay. The video ended. I sat there, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness, tears of rage. File 4 IP logs. A spreadsheet showing login activity on my parents' bank account. Every fraudulent login came from an IP address registered to Garrett's home network. File 5 purchase receipts. 2 files. One was a receipt for deepfake voice cloning software purchased with Garrett's credit card. The other was an invoice from an industrial chemical supplier showing the purchase of 500 grams of arsenic trioxide. The shipping address was a P.O. box registered under a fake name, but the payment method was traced back to Garrett's PayPal account. I closed the laptop and sat back in the chair, my whole body shaking. Brennan had done it. He'd built the case. He'd gathered the proof, and now it was mine. I picked up my phone and called Special Agent Voss. He answered on the second ring. Mrs. Mercer. I have it, I said. My voice was steady, cold. I have everything. The USB, the recordings, the receipts, all of it. There was a pause. Then Voss said, I'm on my way. 2 hours later, I was back in the windowless conference room at the FBI Portland field office, sitting across from Special Agent Holden Voss and Special Agent Cruz Hamilton. The USB drive sat in the middle of the table, like a piece of evidence at a murder trial, which I realized was exactly what it was. Voss had arrived at my parents' house within 40 minutes of my call. He'd taken the drive, asked me a few questions, and told me to meet him at the office at 10. I'd driven there in a daze, my hands tight on the wheel, my mind replaying Brennan's final video over and over. Now Cruz had the USB plugged into his laptop and the contents were projected onto a screen on the wall. Voss stood beside the screen arms, crossed his face unreadable. Cruz sat at the table, scrolling through files, making notes on a yellow legal pad. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Let's start with the insurance policy," Cruz said. He pulled up a scanned image of the contract Brennan had included in the USB files. It was a standard life insurance application from a company called Secure Life Financial, dated November 18th of last year. Brennan's signature was at the bottom, along with a witness signature that I didn't recognize. Cruz pointed to a section near the top. "The policy amount is $850,000. Primary beneficiary Corinne Mercer, 70%. Contingent beneficiary Garrett Calloway, 30%. I stared at the screen. "I never knew this existed." "Your husband didn't tell you?" Voss asked. "No. We'd talked about getting life insurance a couple of years ago, but we never followed through, or at least I thought we didn't." Cruz tapped his pen against the legal pad. "According to the terms of the policy, if the primary beneficiary is unable to claim the payout within 90 days of the insured's death, the full amount transfers to the contingent beneficiary." I frowned. "What do you mean, unable to claim?" "It means if you're not in the United States, or if you're unavailable for any reason, the insurance company can default to the contingent." Cruz looked at me. "You've been deployed in Germany for the past 8 months. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And Garrett knew that?" I nodded slowly. He knew. Voss leaned against the table. "So here's what we think happened. Garrett convinced your husband to sign this policy back in November. Brennan was probably drunk. There's a note in one of the audio files where Garrett mentions getting him drunk to sign paperwork. Once the policy was active, all Garrett had to do was wait. If Brennan died, you'd inherit 70%. But Garrett knew you were overseas. He knew you wouldn't be back in time to claim it. After 90 days, the full payout, $850,000, would go to him. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. He planned this from the beginning. "Yes," Voss said quietly, "he did." Cruz pulled up another file, a spreadsheet showing Garrett's financial history. "Let's talk about motive. According to the bank records and transaction logs Brennan collected, your brother has been gambling online for the past 2 years. Sports, betting, poker, tournaments, horse racing. By last summer, he'd lost $280,000. I stared at the numbers on the screen. 280,000. Most of it was borrowed money. He took out loans from a group connected to organized crime local guys with ties to a larger network in Seattle. When he couldn't pay them back, they started threatening him. And his family." My stomach turned. "Fallon and Evan." "Exactly." Cruz scrolled down. "In September, Garrett embezzled $150,000 from TechWave Solutions, where he sits on the board as a minority investor. He buried the transactions in fake consulting fees routed through offshore accounts. That bought him time, but he still owed $130,000. And the loan sharks weren't going to wait forever." Voss picked up the thread. "So he came up with a plan. Get Brennan to sign a life insurance policy. Kill Brennan. Make it look like natural causes. Collect the payout. Pay off the debt. Walk away clean." I closed my eyes. My head was pounding. "And Fallon helped him." Cruz nodded. "Fallon Calloway is a registered nurse at Providence St. Vincent Medical Center. She has access to medical records, prescriptions, and diagnostic equipment. According to the receipts Brennan collected, she forged the signature of Brennan's primary care physician on the medical clearance form required for the insurance application. Without that signature, the policy wouldn't have been approved. So she knew," I said. My voice was flat. "She knew what Garrett was planning, and she helped him." "Yes." I opened my eyes and looked at Voss. "What about the arsenic? Where did he get it?" Cruz pulled up another file, a receipt from an online chemical supplier. Garrett purchased 500 grams of arsenic trioxide from a company that sells industrial chemicals. He used a fake name and had it shipped to a P.O. box in Gresham, but the payment was made through his PayPal account, which we can trace. Voss stepped closer to the table. Arsenic trioxide is tasteless and odorless when mixed into liquids. Fallon was giving Brennan protein shakes and smoothies supposedly to help with his fatigue. We believe she was dosing him with small amounts of arsenic over a period of weeks. It would have caused nausea, headaches, weakness symptoms that look like stress or the flu. By the time Brennan got suspicious and ordered a private blood test, the arsenic levels in his system were dangerously high. I thought about the video. Brennan sitting in his office, pale and exhausted, telling me he'd been poisoned. My hands clenched into fists. How did he die? I asked. The death certificate said cardiac arrest. Cruz glanced at Voss, who nodded. We believe Garrett and Fallon administered a final lethal dose, Voss said, probably injected directly into his bloodstream. Arsenic poisoning causes multi-organ failure, which can trigger cardiac arrest. To a medical examiner who isn't looking for foul play, it would appear to be a natural heart attack. I felt bile rise in my throat. My brother killed my husband. For money. Yes, Voss said, he did. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to drive to Garrett's house and drag him out into the street. But I just sat there, my nails digging into my palms, trying to breathe. Cruz closed his laptop. We have enough evidence here to build a case. The audio confession, the financial records, the arsenic receipts, the forged medical clearance, it's all admissible. We can arrest Garrett and Fallon. But there's one more issue we need to address. I looked up. What issue? Voss met my eyes. Your parents. I froze. What about them? $35,000 was transferred from Brennan's account into your parents' joint account between November and January. If we don't explain how that happened, the prosecution could argue that your parents were involved, that they knowingly participated in a money laundering scheme. That's insane, I said. They didn't know anything about this. We believe you, Voss said, but we need to prove it. Cruz pulled up another spreadsheet on the screen. This one was dense rows of transactions dates, account numbers. He zoomed in on a section highlighted in red. Between September and December, Garrett embezzled $150,000 from TechWave Solutions, Cruz said. He buried it in fake consulting fees paid to offshore shell companies. But he couldn't just deposit that money into his personal account without raising red flags. So he laundered it through your parents' joint checking account. I stared at him. My parents' account? Yes. Cruz pulled up a bank statement from Columbia Bank. 6 transfers totaling $150,000 went from TechWave's offshore accounts into the joint account belonging to Walter and Lorraine Calloway. Within 48 hours of each deposit, the money was withdrawn, either in cash or transferred to an account registered under Garrett's name. My stomach dropped. My parents didn't authorize that. They didn't even know about it. We believe you, Voss said. But here's the problem. Every deposit was authorized with your father's electronic signature, and every withdrawal was confirmed by a phone call to the bank, a call in which someone claiming to be Walter Calloway verified the transaction. I shook my head. That's impossible. My father would never... It wasn't your father, Cruz said. He clicked play on an audio file. A voice came through the speakers, my father's voice. Exact, the rasp, the pauses, even the faint accent. Yes, this is Walter Calloway. I'm calling to confirm the transfer of $15,000 from my joint checking account. Cruz stopped the recording. This call was made to Columbia Bank on December 3rd, but the voice isn't real. I felt the floor drop. How? Deepfake voice cloning software, Cruz said. Commercially available. You feed it audio samples, voicemails, recordings, and it generates a synthetic voice. Garrett purchased a subscription to a service called Voice Mimic Pro in October. We have the receipt. He used it to clone your father's voice and make fraudulent calls to the bank. Voss stepped in. He also forged your father's electronic signature on the bank's authorization forms. All he needed was a scanned copy of your dad's real signature, tax returns, legal paperwork, anything. I sat back, my head spinning. So, Garrett stole $150,000, funneled it through my parents' account, using fake signatures and fake phone calls, and framed my father for money laundering. Yes, Voss said, and my parents had no idea. Correct, but from the bank's perspective and from ours, the transactions looked legitimate. your father's signature, your father's voice, your father's account. I thought about my father this morning sitting at the kitchen table looking so tired, so small. You said you questioned him, I said quietly. Voss nodded. Last week, we'd been reviewing Brennan's financial records. When we saw the transfers into your parents' account, we flagged it. We brought your father in and asked him to explain. What did he say? He said he didn't know anything about the deposits. He hadn't authorized any transfers, but he couldn't prove it. The bank records showed his signature, his voice. From our perspective, he looked like either a co-conspirator or a victim. Either way, we had to investigate. I closed my eyes. He must have been terrified. He was, Voss said. But he cooperated fully, gave us access to everything financial records, phone logs, computer. He answered every question, never wavered, kept saying he didn't know how the money got there. I looked up. Did you believe him? Voss met my eyes. Yes, but belief isn't evidence. Until we had proof that someone else was behind the transactions, your father was still a person of interest. The weight of that hit me. My father, a retired engineer who'd spent 40 years fixing furnaces, was being investigated by the FBI for money laundering because of Garrett, because my brother had used him as a tool. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to keep my voice steady. This is what Brennan meant. In his video, he said not to let my parents get blamed. He knew Garrett had used their account. He knew they'd look guilty. That's correct, Cruz said. And that's why Brennan collected this evidence. He pulled up a document on the screen, a table showing login activity on my parents' bank account. Each entry had a date, time, and IP address. Every fraudulent login came from this address, Cruz said, pointing to one at the top. We traced it back to Garrett's home network. He logged into your parents' account from his own house. Didn't use a VPN, didn't mask his location. So you have proof it was Garrett, I said. Yes, and Brennan also found the receipts. Garrett purchased the deepfake software using his personal credit card. Didn't even use a fake name. Voss leaned forward. Once we saw the IP logs and the software receipts, we knew your father had been framed. We cleared him 2 days ago. I exhaled. Does he know? We called him yesterday and told him he was no longer under investigation, Voss said. But we didn't tell him why. We couldn't not until we'd reviewed all the evidence. And we didn't want to tip off Garrett. I looked at Voss. So my father knows he's clear, but he doesn't know Garrett set him up. Correct. I thought about my father's face this morning, the relief when I'd asked to open the safe. He'd been cleared, but he didn't know the whole truth. And when he found out, when he learned his own son had tried to frame him, it would destroy him. Cruz turned back to his laptop. There's one more thing Brennan left for you. A video. He recorded it 3 days before he died. He clicked play, and Brennan's face appeared on the screen. Brennan looked thinner than I'd ever seen him. His face was drawn, his cheekbones sharp beneath pale skin. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hair, normally neat, always combed, looked dull and unwashed. He sat in his home office, the one with the window that looked out onto the quiet street where we'd lived together. But the light coming through that window was gray weak, like the life was draining out of the room. He looked into the camera, and when he spoke, his voice was steady, determined. Corinne, if you're watching this, I didn't make it. And if you didn't make it, it means you've already seen the other files. You know about Garrett. You know about the insurance. You know about the arsenic. But there's one more thing you need to understand. He leaned closer to the camera. Garrett used your parents. He stole $150,000 from TechWave and laundered it through their joint checking account. He forged your father's electronic signature. He used deepfake software to clone your father's voice and make fraudulent calls to the bank. He made it look like your dad was part of the scheme. And if the FBI investigates, if they dig into Brennan Mercer's financial history and find those transfers, your parents are going to look guilty. My chest tightened. I stared at the screen at Brennan's tired, desperate face. I couldn't let that happen, he said. So I spent the last 3 weeks collecting proof. I logged into your parents' bank account. Your dad gave me the password years ago when I helped him with his taxes. And I pulled every transaction record, every authorization form, every login. Then I traced the IP addresses. He held up a piece of paper covered in handwritten notes. Every fraudulent login came from Garrett's home network. Every single one. He didn't bother hiding it. He logged in from his own house using his own computer. I documented it all. Dates, times, IP addresses, it's all in the files. He set the paper down and looked back at the camera. I also found the receipts. Garrett bought the deepfake software Voice Mimic Pro using his personal credit card. He didn't even try to cover his tracks. And I found the audio files. The bank recorded every verification call. I compared them to your father's real voice voicemail's old recordings, and I can prove they're fake. The rhythm is off, the cadence. A human ear might not catch it, but audio analysis software will. He paused, his jaw tight. Your parents are innocent, Corinne. They didn't know what Garrett was doing. They didn't authorize those transfers. They didn't make those calls. And I've proven it. Every piece of evidence is on this drive. IP logs, audio comparisons, purchase receipts, bank records. It's all there. His voice cracked. If I die before I can give this to the FBI, you have to do it for me. Don't let your parents get blamed for what Garrett did. Don't let him destroy them the way he's destroying me. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes red. I love you, Corinne. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was scared. I thought if I told you, Garrett would come after you too. But if you're watching this, it's too late to protect you. All I can do now is give you the tools to finish this. He looked directly into the camera one last time. Make them pay. The video ended. The conference room was silent. I sat there staring at the blank screen, tears streaming down my face. Not quiet tears, not the kind you try to hide. These were loud, gasping sobs that tore out of my chest before I could stop them. I covered my face with my hands. My whole body was shaking. Brennan had spent his final days sick, poisoned, dying, protecting my parents. He'd logged into bank accounts, traced IP addresses, analyzed audio files, collected receipts. He'd built a case, not to save himself, to save them. And then he died. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Voss. His grip was firm, steady. Mrs. Mercer, he said quietly. I know this is hard, but your husband did something extraordinary. He gave us everything we need. I lowered my hands and looked up at him, my vision blurred with tears. He died trying to protect my parents. He succeeded, Voss said. Because of the evidence he collected, we've cleared your father completely. Walter Calloway is no longer a person of interest. We'll be sending a formal letter to the U.S. Attorney's office confirming that he had no knowledge of and no involvement in the fraudulent transactions. His name is clear. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. Does he know? Not yet, but we'll tell him. Today if you want. I nodded, unable to speak. Cruz leaned forward, his voice gentle. Brennan also left notes in the files, timestamps, a timeline of every transaction, every login, every forged signature. He even included a written statement explaining how he discovered the fraud and why he believed your parents were innocent. It's detailed, professional, admissible in court. He was smarter than Garrett gave him credit for, what Voss said. Your brother thought he'd covered his tracks, but Brennan saw through it, and he documented everything. I looked at the blank screen where Brennan's face had been moments ago. He didn't deserve this. No, some Voss said. He didn't. I sat there for a long moment trying to pull myself together. Then I looked at Voss. So what now? I asked. My voice was hoarse. You have the evidence. You have proof Garrett embezzled money, laundered it, forged signatures, used deepfake software. You have the arsenic receipts. You have audio of him confessing to the insurance fraud. You have everything. Can't you arrest him? Voss exchanged a glance with Cruz. We can, Voss said carefully. But here's the problem. Most of this evidence was collected by a private citizen, your husband, not by law enforcement. That makes it complicated. Garrett's defense attorney will argue that the evidence was obtained illegally, that the chain of custody is compromised, that it's inadmissible. But it's the truth, I said. It is. And we believe a jury will see that. But we need to build the strongest case possible. Right now, we have circumstantial evidence, strong circumstantial evidence. But we don't have a confession. We don't have a witness who saw Garrett administer the poison. We don't have definitive proof of causation, only correlation. I stared at him. So what are you saying, you can't arrest him? We can arrest him, Voss said. But if we do it now with what we have, there's a chance he walks. A good defense attorney could poke holes in the timeline, question the authenticity of the recordings, argue that Brennan had a motive to fabricate evidence. We'd win eventually, but it would take time, and Garrett would know we're coming. Cruz nodded. What we need is something irrefutable, a confession, or catching him in the act. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Catching him in the act of what Brennan's already dead. Voss's expression darkened. That's true, but Garrett doesn't know what we know. He doesn't know about the USB drive. He doesn't know Brennan left evidence, and he doesn't know you've brought it to us. I looked at him. So what are you suggesting? Voss leaned forward, his eyes steady on mine. We need to make him nervous, he said. We need to make him think you're getting close. And when he panics, when he tries to cover his tracks or silence you or run, we'll be there, and we'll have him. I felt a chill run down my spine. You want me to be bait? Voss didn't look away. Only if you're willing. I thought about Brennan's face on the screen. His voice. Make them pay. I looked at Voss. Tell me what to do. I drove back to Beaverton in silence. The highway stretched out in front of me, gray and wet under a February sky that couldn't decide whether to rain or just threaten. My hands gripped the steering wheel. My mind replayed Brennan's video, Voss's voice, the plan we'd started to form. But right now, none of that mattered. I had to tell my parents the truth. By the time I pulled into the driveway on Oak Valley Road, it was just after 4 in the afternoon. My father's car was parked in the same spot it had been that morning. The porch light was on, even though it wasn't dark yet. My mother always turned it on early in the winter. She said it made the house feel less empty. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door. Then I got out and went inside. My father was in the living room, sitting in his worn leather recliner, reading a book he wasn't really reading. My mother was in the kitchen washing dishes that were already clean. They both looked up when I walked in. Corinne, my mother said. Her voice was thin, fragile. Are you all right? I set my purse down on the counter. I need to talk to both of you. Can you sit down? My father closed his book and stood. My mother dried her hands on a dish towel, her movements slow, careful. They came into the living room and sat together on the couch. I pulled a chair over and sat across from them. For a moment, I didn't know how to start. Then I just said it. Brennan didn't die of a heart attack. My mother's face went white. My father didn't move. He was poisoned, I said, with arsenic over a period of weeks, and the person who poisoned him was Garrett. The words hung in the air like smoke. My mother made a small, choked sound. My father stared at me, his mouth slightly open like he'd forgotten how to close it. I know this is hard to hear, I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. But Brennan left evidence, a USB drive. He recorded everything. Audio files, bank records, medical tests, receipts. He knew Garrett was trying to kill him, and he documented it. And this morning, I gave it all to the FBI. My father finally found his voice. Corinne, are you sure? I'm sure, Dad. I've seen the evidence. I've heard the recordings. Garrett confessed. He admitted he poisoned Brennan to collect on a life insurance policy. He was in debt $280,000. He'd embezzled money from TechWave, and he still owed more. So he convinced Brennan to sign a life insurance policy for $850,000. And then he killed him. My mother put her hand over her mouth. Tears were already streaming down her face. Fallon helped him, I said. She's a nurse. She forged a doctor's signature on the insurance forms, and she gave Brennan the poison. Protein shakes, smoothies, small doses over weeks until he was too sick to fight back, and then they gave him a final dose, one that stopped his heart. My father shook his head slowly. No, Garrett wouldn't. He did, Dad. I leaned forward. And he used you, both of you. He laundered the money he stole through your joint bank account. He forged your signature. He used deepfake software to clone your voice and make fraudulent calls to the bank. He made it look like you were part of the scheme. If Brennan hadn't collected proof, you'd be under investigation right now for money laundering. My father's face drained of color. What? The FBI questioned you last week. They thought you were involved, but Brennan proved you weren't. He tracked Garrett's IP address. He found the receipts for the deepfake software. He documented everything, and because of him, you've been cleared. My mother was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. My father just sat there staring at nothing. "Mom," I said gently. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I know this is—" My mother let out a wail, a sound I'd never heard from her before. Raw. Animal. She stood up, swayed, and then her knees buckled. My father caught her before she hit the floor. "Lorraine," he shouted. "Lorraine, stay with me." Her eyes had rolled back. Her body went limp in his arms. "Call 911, I yelled, already pulling out my phone. 20 minutes later, we were in the emergency room at Providence St. Vincent Medical Center on Southwest Barnes Road. My mother was on a gurney, an oxygen mask over her face, an IV in her arm. My father sat beside her, holding her hand, his face gray and hollow. A doctor in blue scrubs came over. She was in her 40s with short dark hair and tired eyes. "Mr. Calloway," she said. My father looked up. "Your wife is stable," the doctor said. "But she's experienced acute psychological shock. Her blood pressure spiked dangerously high and her heart rate was erratic when she came in. We've given her a sedative and we're going to keep her overnight for observation." "Is she going to be okay?" I asked. The doctor looked at me. "Physically, yes, but emotionally, she's going to need time and support." Whatever she heard today, it hit her hard. I knotted my throat tight. The doctor left. My father sat there still holding my mother's hand. She was asleep now, her breathing shallow but steady. "Dad," I said quietly. He didn't look at me. He just stared at my mother's pale face. "I failed," he whispered. "No, you didn't." "I raised him." His voice cracked. "I raised a murderer." I pulled a chair over and sat beside him. "You raised 2 children, Dad. One of them turned out to be a killer. The other turned out to be me. That's not your fault." He shook his head. "I should have seen it. I should have known. How could you have known Garrett hid it? From all of us." My father finally looked at me. His eyes were red wet. "He killed your husband, Corinne, and he tried to destroy us, his own parents." "I know. How do we come back from that?" I didn't have an answer. We sat there in silence, the hospital machines beeping softly around us. My mother slept. My father held her hand, and I stared at the white tile floor, wondering the same thing he was. How do you come back from this? That night, I drove back to the house in Beaverton alone. My father stayed at the hospital with my mother. I told him I'd come back in the morning. I went upstairs to my old room, lay down on the narrow bed, and stared at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about my mother's face when I told her, the way she'd collapsed, the sound of her scream. I thought about my father's words. "I failed. I raised a murderer." And I thought about Brennan, the way he'd looked in that final video, the way he'd said, "Make them pay." I closed my eyes. My family was broken, maybe beyond repair, but I wasn't done yet. At 2 a.m, I locked the bathroom door and sank down onto the cold tile floor. The house was silent. My father was still at the hospital with my mother. I was alone. I pulled my knees up to my chest and wrapped my arms around them. And then I cried. Not the loud, gasping sobs from earlier. These were quiet tears, the kind that slip down your face without sound, without warning, the kind that come when you're too tired to fight them anymore. I pressed my forehead against my knees and let them fall. I thought about Brennan, the way he used to laugh full and loud like he couldn't help himself, the way he'd wake me up on Sunday mornings with coffee and toast, even though I always told him I didn't need breakfast, the way he'd hold me at night, his arm heavy and warm across my waist, and whisper, "You're stronger than you think, Corinne." Don't ever forget that. But I didn't feel strong, not tonight. Tonight I felt like everything I'd ever loved had been taken from me. Brennan was gone. My mother was in the hospital, sedated and broken. My father was sitting at her bedside blaming himself for raising a son who'd turned into a killer. And that son, my brother, the man who'd taught me how to ride a bike, who'd walked me down the aisle at my wedding, had poisoned my husband for money, for a gambling debt, for nothing that mattered. I thought about the video, Brennan's gaunt face, his hollow eyes, the way he'd looked into the camera and said, "Make them pay." But how was I supposed to make them pay when I could barely breathe? I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, but the tears kept coming. I didn't try to stop them. I just sat there on the cold bathroom floor alone in the dark and let myself break. My phone buzzed. I looked down, a text message from Quinlan. I opened it. Corinne, I know you're going through hell right now, but you're not alone. The FBI is working. I'm working. And Brennan, he didn't give up. He fought until the very end. He left you everything you need to finish this. Don't let him down. Don't let Garrett win. I stared at the screen, my vision blurred. Another message came through. Brennan believed in you, so do I. I lowered the phone and closed my eyes. My chest felt tight. My throat burned. But somewhere beneath the grief and the exhaustion and the rage, I felt something else. A spark. Small, fragile, but there. I thought about Brennan's words. You're stronger than you think. Maybe he was right. I opened my eyes and looked at myself in the mirror across from me. My reflection was a mess. Red eyes, tear-streaked face, hair pulled back in a messy knot. I looked like someone who'd been through a war. And maybe I had. But I wasn't dead yet. I wiped my face with a towel, stood up, and unlocked the bathroom door. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. Special Agent Holden Voss. I answered. Mrs. Mercer. Voss said. His voice was calm, steady. I know it's late, but I wanted to check in. Are you all right? I leaned against the bathroom door frame. I don't know. I heard about your mother. I'm sorry. She'll be okay, physically at least. And you? I didn't answer right away. Then I said, I'm still here. That's good, because we're going to need you. I straightened. What do you mean? We've been monitoring Garrett's activity since you left the office this afternoon. Phone calls, internet searches, movement. He's nervous. He called Fallon 3 times tonight. He searched for FBI investigation process, and how long does evidence take to process? He knows something's wrong. He just doesn't know what. I felt my pulse quicken. So what do? We push him, Voss said. Tomorrow later today, technically I want you to call him. Tell him you need to see him. Tell him you've been going through Brennan's things and you found some paperwork you don't understand. Make it sound innocent, but make him think you're getting close. And then we watch. If he panics, if he tries to cover his tracks, if he makes a move toward you, we'll be there, and we'll have him. I thought about Garrett, the way he'd sounded on the phone earlier this week. Worried, scared, guilty. You want me to lie to him? I want you to set a trap, Voss said, the same way Brennan did, quietly, carefully, until we have enough to put him away for the rest of his life. I looked at my reflection in the mirror again. This time, I didn't see someone who'd been through a war. I saw someone who was about to win one. Okay, I said, I'll do it. Good. Call him around 10 in the morning. Keep it casual. Don't give him a reason to run. Just plant the seed. We'll take care of the rest. What if he doesn't take the bait? He will, Voss said. He's desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. All right. Get some rest, Mrs. Mercer. You're going to need it. I will. He hung up. I stood there for a moment, the phone still in my hand, staring at the dark hallway in front of me. I didn't know what evidence Voss was talking about. I didn't know what would happen tomorrow when I called Garrett. I didn't know if the trap would work, or if Garrett would see through it, or if this whole thing would fall apart. But I knew one thing. Brennan had trusted me to finish this, and I wasn't going to let him down. I turned off the bathroom light and walked back to my room. I lay down on the narrow bed, pulled the blanket up to my chin, and closed my eyes. This time I slept. Monday morning, Voss called me. I'd spent the weekend at the hospital with my mother. She was stable, awake, but fragile. She didn't talk much. She just stared out the window, her hands folded in her lap like she was trying to make sense of a world that had stopped making sense. My father sat beside her, silent and hollow. He hadn't said more than a few words since Friday night. I'd stayed with them, sleeping in a chair in the corner of the hospital room, waking every hour to check on my mother. But by Sunday evening, the doctors said she could go home. So I drove my parents back to Beaverton, helped my mother into bed, and sat with my father in the living room until he finally fell asleep in his recliner. And then Monday morning, my phone rang. Mrs. Mercer, Voss said, I need you to come to the office. There's something you need to know. I was at the FBI Portland field office by 10. Voss was waiting for me in the same windowless conference room where I'd sat 3 days ago. But this time, he wasn't alone. Special Agent Tessa Lang stood beside him, her arms crossed, her expression tight. She was the surveillance specialist, the one Voss had introduced during my first visit. But I'd barely spoken to her since. Today, she looked like she had bad news. I sat down at the table. What's going on? Voss exchanged a glance with Tessa. Then he sat across from me. "We have DNA results," he said. I frowned. DNA from what? From Quinlan Barrett. My stomach dropped. "Why were you testing Quinlan's DNA?" Tessa stepped forward. "Because we had questions. Quinlan Barrett appeared in your life at a very convenient time. He was Brennan's assistant. He had access to Brennan's files, his computer, his office. He was the one who gave you the envelope at the funeral, and he's been in contact with you ever since." I stared at her. "You think Quinlan is involved?" "We didn't know," Voss said. "So we ran a background check, and when that didn't give us enough, we collected a DNA sample." "How?" "He left a coffee cup in the break room at TechWave last week," Tessa said. "We retrieved it, ran the sample through our database." I felt a chill run down my spine, and Voss leaned forward, his eyes steady on mine. "Quinlan Barrett is Garrett Calloway's biological son." The room went silent. I stared at Voss. My brain refused to process the words. I heard them. I understood the individual pieces, but together they didn't make sense. "What?" I said quietly. "Quinlan Barrett is Garrett's son," Voss repeated. "The DNA match is conclusive, 99.9% probability." I shook my head. "That's not possible. Garrett doesn't have a son. He doesn't have any kids except—" I stopped. "Except Evan, Fallon's son, who's 8 years old." "Evan is Fallon's son from a previous relationship," Tessa said. "Garrett adopted him when he married Fallon. But Quinlan is different. He's Garrett's biological child, born in 1997, which means Garrett was 19 when Quinlan was conceived." I sat back in my chair, my mind spinning. 19, so 28 years ago. "Correct. And Quinlan is 29 now." "Yes." I tried to wrap my head around it. Garrett had a son I'd never known about, a son who'd been working for Brennan, a son who'd handed me the envelope at the funeral, a son who'd been helping me build a case against his own father. "Does Garrett know?" I asked. "We don't think so," Voss said. We ran a search on Quinlan's background. He was raised by his mother, a woman named Sarah Barrett, in southeast Portland. She died in 2005 when Quinlan was 8. After that, he went into foster care. He aged out of the system at 18 and went to community college, got a degree in information technology, started working for TechWave 2 years ago. And Garrett never knew he existed. Tessa pulled out a file and slid it across the table. "We think Quinlan found out about Garrett when he was 18. He ran a DNA ancestry test, one of those commercial kits you can order online. It flagged a match with Garrett. So Quinlan reached out." I opened the file. Inside was a printout of an email exchange. The sender was listed as quinlan.barrett.1997.gmail.com. The recipient was garrett.calloway.callaway.realty.com. The first email was dated March 2015. "Mr. Calloway, my name is Quinlan Barrett. I'm 18 years old. I recently took a DNA test and discovered that you are my biological father. I don't know if you know about me, but I wanted to reach out. I'd like to meet you if you're willing. Quinlan." The reply came 2 days later. "I don't know who you are or what you're trying to pull, but I'm not your father. Don't contact me again." Garrett Calloway. I stared at the email. My hands were shaking. "Garrett rejected him," I said quietly. "Yes," Voss said. "And according to the records, Quinlan never tried to contact him again, until 2 years ago when he applied for a job at TechWave Solutions, the company where Garrett sits on the board." I looked up. "He wanted to get close to Garrett. That's what we think. But he didn't go to Garrett directly. He went to Brennan. He became Brennan's assistant. He worked alongside him for 2 years. And when Brennan started suspecting Garrett was trying to kill him, Quinlan was there, watching, listening, collecting evidence." Tessa leaned against the table. "We don't know if Quinlan was working with Brennan or if Brennan even knew who Quinlan really was. But what we do know is that Quinlan has been one step ahead of us this entire time. He gave you the envelope at the funeral. He told you to go to the FBI. He's been feeding you information. And now we need to know why." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Quinlan was Garrett's son. The man who'd been helping me, who'd given me Brennan's evidence, who'd sent me encouraging text messages, who'd told me not to give up, was the biological son of the man who'd killed my husband. "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered. "That's what we're going to find out," Voss said. He picked up his phone and sent a quick text. "I called him 20 minutes ago and asked him to come in. He should be here any minute." I sat there staring at the table, my mind racing. Quinlan was Garrett's son. He'd been rejected, cast aside, and now he was helping me take Garrett down. Was it revenge? Was it guilt? Was it something else? I didn't know, but I was about to find out. The conference room door swung open at exactly 10:30. Quinlan Barrett stood in the doorway, his eyes red and swollen behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a faded gray hoodie and dark jeans, and when he crossed the threshold, his shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the world had finally crushed him. I sat opposite him at the long oak table, my hands folded, my breath shallow. Special Agent Holden Voss closed the door behind Quinlan and gestured to the empty chair. "Sit down, Mr. Barrett," Voss said quietly. His voice carried no anger, only a weary patience that filled the room. Quinlan lowered himself into the chair, gripping the edge of the table with white knuckles. I wanted to reach across and touch his hand, but my own hands felt frozen. Agent Tessa Lang stood by the projector at the far end of the room, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Cruz Hamilton leaned against the wall near the window, notepad in hand. Voss took the seat at the head of the table and opened a manila folder. He withdrew a single sheet of paper and slid it toward Quinlan. "We received the DNA results from the state lab this morning. 99.9% certainty. Quinlan, you are Garrett Calloway's biological son." Quinlan flinched as if he'd been struck. He nodded, once his jaw tight. "Yes," he whispered. "I know." I turned to Quinlan, my chest aching. "Why didn't you tell me?" He dropped his gaze to the table. "Because I was ashamed." For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead seemed deafening. Then Quinlan drew a shaky breath and began. 1997. Garrett was 19 years old. He got a girlfriend pregnant, my mother, Sarah Barrett. She was 21, working as a waitress at a diner on East Burnside. When she told Garrett, he said he wasn't ready. He promised he'd be there, but he disappeared a week later, changed his phone number, never came back. Quinlan's voice cracked. He paused, rubbing his eyes with the heel of his palm. "My mother raised me alone. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment in East Portland. She worked double shifts to pay rent. I remember her coming home at midnight exhausted, smelling like grease and coffee. She never complained. She just kept going." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. 2005, Quinlan continued. "I was 8 years old. My mother developed liver failure. The doctors said it was cirrhosis caused by years of heavy drinking, but I didn't know she drank. She hid it from me. She died in November, 3 days before Thanksgiving. I had no other family. Child Protective Services took me to a group home in Gresham. I grew up there. 16 kids in one house, 2 social workers? I slept in a bunk bed with another boy who had nightmares every night." Agent Lang shifted her weight, her expression softening. "When I turned 18, I aged out of the system. I got a job stocking shelves at a grocery store and took night classes at Portland Community College. In 2015, I did one of those Ancestry DNA tests. Ancestry DNA. I was curious. I wanted to know if I had anyone out there." Quinlan pulled a folded printout from his jeans pocket and smoothed it on the table. 3 months later, I got a match. Garrett Calloway, 99.7%. Father. I stared at the paper at the cold precision of the numbers. "I emailed him," Quinlan said. "I told him who I was. I sent him a picture of my mother. I asked if we could meet. He replied 2 days later. One line, 'I don't know you. Don't contact me again.'" Quinlan's voice grew harder. "But I couldn't let it go. I found his address. I drove to his house, 523 Hillcrest Avenue, West Lynn. He was 38 by then, married to Fallon. They had Evan, their son." I knocked on the door. Garrett opened it, looked at me and said, "You're not my son. Don't come near my family again." He shut the door in my face. Voss leaned forward. "So you wanted revenge?" "Yes." Quinlan's voice was barely a whisper. "I earned a degree in IT. I got hired at TechWave in 2023. Brennan was my supervisor. I told him who I was. He believed me. He said Garrett had always been selfish. He warned me that Garrett had threatened him before. My heart clenched. Brennan had known. He had tried to protect Quinlan. When I learned Garrett was planning to poison Brennan, I installed a hidden camera in Garrett's car, a Vantrue N4 dash cam disguised as part of the rear-view mirror. October 24th, 2024. Sabasa Deets. Voss straightened. Do you have proof? Quinlan reached into his backpack and pulled out a small black external hard drive. He set it on the table. Hidden camera footage from Garrett's car. The confession where he admits to poisoning Brennan. Voss picked up the drive, turning it over in his hand. This is the original. Yes, time-stamped, GPS tagged, chain of custody intact. Tessa Lang stepped forward, took the drive, and plugged it into a laptop on the side table. Within seconds, the projector screen lit up with a grainy interior view of a car at night. I watched Garrett's face on the screen. He was talking to Fallon, his expression cold and calculating. His words were muffled, but subtitles scrolled across the bottom. I'm killing Brennan. The arsenic will stop his heart. My stomach twisted. Voss paused the video. This is admissible. We have motive evidence and now a confession on tape. I stood and walked around the table to Quinlan. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his cheeks. I pulled him into a hug, feeling his body shake. You're not alone anymore, I whispered. I'll help you. He nodded against my shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of something I'd almost forgotten: hope. Before I share what the FBI found on Quinlan's hidden camera the moment we finally had undeniable proof, I want to hear from you. Type proof in the comments so I know you're following along. Please note the upcoming scenes include fictionalized details crafted to convey the emotional weight of these events. If you're uncomfortable with that, this is a natural place to pause. Special Agent Voss took the USB drive from Quinlan's hand and turned it over slowly, as if weighing it. Then he stood, walked to the laptop at the head of the conference table, and inserted the drive into the port. The screen flickered to life. This was recorded on a dashcam you installed in Garrett's vehicle. Voss asked, pulling up the file directory. Yes, Quinlan said, his voice still raw. A Vantrue N4 3-channel camera. I mounted it behind the rearview mirror in October of last year. Garrett never noticed. It records in 1-hour loops, overwrites automatically unless you pull the SD card. I checked it every 2 weeks. Voss clicked on a file labeled GC_vehicle_02042 5_2147.mp4. The timestamp read February 4th, 2025/2147, 2 days before Brennan died. Agent Cruz murmured, leaning closer. The video began. The interior of a car at night, dashboard lights glowing faintly, street lamp glare streaking across the windshield. 2 figures sat in the front seats. I recognized them immediately. Garrett on the left, hands gripping the steering wheel. Fallon on the right, her face in shadow. Voss turned up the volume. At first there was only the hum of the engine and distant traffic. Then Garrett spoke. Garrett. It's almost over. By the end of the week, Brennan will be dead. My breath stopped. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white. Fallon voice, quiet, strained. Are you sure the dose is right? Garrett. You're the nurse, you tell me. Fallon, 300 milligrams of arsenic trioxide in his protein shake. It'll stop his heart within 6 to 12 hours. It'll look like cardiac arrest. No one will question it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the laptop across the room, but I sat frozen, staring at the screen at my brother's profile lit by passing headlights. Garrett. Good. Once he's gone, the insurance pays out. $850,000. That clears the debt to the mafia and leaves us $500,000 to disappear if we need to. Fallon. What if Corinne figures it out? There was a pause. Garrett turned his head slightly toward Fallon. His voice dropped cold and flat. Garrett, then we kill her too. The air left my lungs. I heard Quinlan inhale sharply beside me. On the screen, Fallon said nothing. After a long silence, Garrett started the car and pulled out of the parking space. The video ended. Voss stopped the playback. The room was utterly silent. I couldn't speak. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the table, fighting the rage boiling up inside me. My brother, my own brother. Not only had he murdered Brennan, he had just threatened to kill me. That, Voss said slowly, is a direct confession to premeditated murder and a stated intent to commit a second homicide. Cruz nodded, his face grim. It's about as clear as evidence gets. Conspiracy to commit murder, first degree. If we can verify the metadata and establish chain of custody, this is admissible in court. Quinlan spoke up, his voice steadier now. The camera records GPS coordinates and timestamps. I pulled the SD card on February 7th, the day after Brennan died. I haven't altered the file. The metadata will prove it was recorded on February 4th at 9:47 p.m. in the parking lot of a Safeway on Southeast Hawthorne Boulevard. Voss made a note. We'll have our digital forensics team verify that. But assuming it checks out, this is the strongest piece of evidence we have. It puts Garrett and Fallon at the center of a murder conspiracy. So we can arrest them, I said, my voice hoarse. Right now. Voss hesitated. We can, but there's a risk. I stared at him. What risk? You just heard him confess. I did, Voss said. But defense attorneys will argue that the recording was obtained without Garrett's knowledge or consent. Oregon is a two-party consent state for audio recordings in private spaces, including vehicles. A judge might rule it inadmissible. But he was planning a murder, I said, my voice rising. Doesn't that override the consent law? Agent Tessa Lang, who had been silent until now, spoke from the corner of the room. It should. Oregon law allows exceptions when there's reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. Quinlan had cause to believe Garrett was involved in Brennan's death. That gives us legal cover. But it's not a guarantee, Voss added. If the judge tosses the video, we're left with circumstantial evidence, financial records, arsenic purchases, deep fake fraud. Strong, but not a slam dunk. We need more. What more do you want? I asked, almost shouting. He just said he killed Brennan and threatened to kill me. Voss met my eyes. His expression was calm but firm. We need them to make another move. If we can catch Garrett or Fallon attempting to harm you, or if we can get a second confession on record, one that's unquestionably legal, then we have an airtight case. Cruz leaned forward. We propose 24/7 surveillance. We'll monitor Garrett's phone, his movements, his bank accounts. If he takes any action, tries to flee, moves money, contacts anyone suspicious, we'll know. And in the meantime, I asked. Voss's gaze didn't waver. In the meantime, we set a trap. I felt my pulse quicken. A trap? Yes, we use you as bait. The room seemed to tilt. Quinlan reached out and touched my arm. Corinne, you don't have to. I'll do it, I said. Voss studied me for a long moment. You understand what that means. You'd be meeting with Garrett, wearing a wire, trying to get him to incriminate himself again. It's dangerous. I know, I said. My voice was steady now. But Brennan's dead. My parents almost went to prison, and Garrett just said he'd kill me. So yes, Agent Voss, I'll be your bait. Voss nodded slowly. All right, we'll start planning immediately. Tomorrow morning, we brief you on the operation. He closed the laptop. The screen went dark. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow, we catch him. 2 days later, on Wednesday morning, I walked back into the FBI Portland field office. The conference room felt different now, smaller, quieter, heavy with anticipation. Special Agent Voss stood at the whiteboard, a diagram of my parents' house sketched in blue marker. Agent Tessa Lang sat beside him, arms crossed. Cruz Hamilton reviewed notes on his laptop. Mrs. Mercer, Voss said as I took my seat, we're ready to move forward. Here's the plan. He tapped the diagram. We'll install 6 hidden cameras in your parents' house living room, kitchen, hallway, front porch, back door, and upstairs landing. High-definition video and audio. Wireless transmission to our surveillance van parked 1 block away on Elmwood Drive. We'll have eyes and ears on everything. Tessa leaned forward. You'll wear a lavalier microphone clipped under your collar right here. She touched the base of her throat. It's nearly invisible. Broadcast range is 300 feet. And you'll carry this. She held up a small black device that looked like a car key fob. Panic button, press it twice, we're inside in 15 seconds. I nodded, my mouth dry. Voss continued. The goal is to get Garrett and Fallon to incriminate themselves. You'll invite them over something casual like discussing Brennan's estate or insurance paperwork. Once they're inside, you'll start asking questions, pointed questions, about the insurance payout, about the timing of Brennan's death, about the transfers to your parents' account. Make them nervous, Cruz added. Criminals don't like being cornered. If they think you know too much, they'll either try to explain, threaten you, or try to kill me, I finished. Voss didn't flinch. Yes, if they pull a weapon, if they make any move to harm you, we breach the door. You'll never be alone. We'll have 6 agents positioned around the property. 2 inside the surveillance van, 4 in unmarked vehicles, full tactical gear. I took a breath when... Saturday night, Voss said. February 22nd. We'll set everything up on Thursday. Your parents will be moved to a secure hotel downtown, the Embassy Suites on Southwest 3rd Avenue. They won't be in the house. It'll just be you. Okay, I said. My hands were shaking, but I forced my voice steady. I'm ready. Voss studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Let's catch them. That same afternoon, 15 miles across Portland in the kitchen of 523 Hillcrest Avenue, Garrett Calloway paced back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear. Fallon sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cold mug of coffee. I'm telling you, Garrett said into the phone, his voice tight. She knows. Corinne's been asking questions. She went to the FBI. I saw an agent's car parked outside her parents' house yesterday. On the other end, the voice was calm and flat. Then you know what you have to do. Yeah, Garrett said. He hung up. Fallon looked up, her face pale. What did they say? Garrett set the phone on the counter and turned to her. We have to kill Corinne. No. Fallon stood up, shaking her head. No, Garrett. I won't do it. I already killed Brennan. I can't kill his wife, too. Garrett crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed her wrist. You don't have a choice. Let go of me, Fallon hissed, trying to pull away. If we don't kill Corinne, the mafia will kill Evan. Fallon froze. What? Garrett's grip tightened. They know where he goes to school. They know what time he gets picked up. They sent me a photo yesterday, Evan on the playground at Ridgewood Elementary. You want him to end up in a ditch somewhere. Fallon's eyes filled with tears. Don't talk about my son like that. Then help me, Garrett said coldly. It's Corinne or Evan. One of them dies. You pick. Fallon stared at him, her whole body trembling. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then slowly, she nodded. Good, Garrett said, releasing her wrist. Saturday night, we'll go to her house. Tell her we want to help with Brennan's estate. Once we're inside, you distract her. I'll handle the rest. Fallon turned away, wiping her eyes. She didn't speak. Garrett watched her, then walked out of the kitchen. On Thursday afternoon, the FBI moved quickly. I stood in the driveway of my parents' house and watched as 2 technicians in plain clothes carried equipment inside small black cases, coils of cable, a laptop. Voss supervised from the front porch. Cameras are going in now, he told me. Living room ceiling fixture, smoke detector in the kitchen, coat hook by the front door, outdoor light above the porch motion sensor by the back door, and a clock on the upstairs landing. You won't even notice them. I nodded. My father stood beside me, his face lined with worry. You're sure about this, Corinne? I'm sure, Dad. My mother, still pale and fragile from her hospital stay, squeezed my hand. We'll be at the hotel. You call us the second it's over. I will, I promised. By Friday evening, the house was ready. The cameras were live. I tested the microphone 3 times. Voss could hear me perfectly from the van. I practiced pressing the panic button until the motion felt automatic. Saturday dragged. I stayed at the house alone, pacing from room to room. At noon, I sent Garrett a text. Hey, can you and Fallon come by tonight? Need to go over some of Brennan's paperwork. Around 10:30, Corinne. His reply came 5 minutes later. Sure, see you then. I stared at the screen, my brother coming to kill me. I spent the afternoon cleaning compulsively, wiping counters, straightening books, folding blankets. Anything to keep my hands busy. At 8 o'clock, Voss called. We're in position, he said. Van is parked on Elmwood. Agents are deployed. Cameras are live. You're not alone, Corinne. We're right here. Okay, I whispered. At 10 o'clock, I clipped the microphone under my collar and slipped the panic button into my jeans pocket. I turned on the living room lights and sat on the couch, hands folded in my lap. At 10:28, headlights swept across the front window. At 10:29, a car door slammed. At 10:30, the doorbell rang. I stood up. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I walked to the door, took a deep breath, and opened it. Garrett stood on the porch in a dark jacket, hands in his pockets. Fallon hovered behind him, her face pale under the yellow glow of the porch light. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Hey, sis," Garrett said, his voice soft, concerned. "We've been worried about you. You doing okay?" I forced a smile. "Come in." They stepped inside. I closed the door behind them and locked it. The click of the deadbolt echoed louder than it should have. Garrett glanced back at the door, then at me. "Living room's this way," I said, gesturing. We walked into the small living room. Garrett sat on the couch. Fallon remained standing near the doorway, arms wrapped around herself like she was cold. I sat in the armchair across from Garrett, hands folded in my lap. The microphone under my collar felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "So," Garrett said, leaning back, trying to look casual. "You said you wanted to talk about Brennan's paperwork." "Yeah," I said. "There are a few things I don't understand." "Like what?" I met his eyes. "Like why you're listed as the contingent beneficiary on his life insurance." Garrett's smile didn't falter. "Brennan wanted to make sure the family was taken care of if something happened to you. You were deployed overseas. It made sense." "Did it?" I asked. My voice was steady. "Because the policy pays out $850,000, and there's a clause that says if I'm out of the country for more than 90 days after his death, the full amount goes to you." Garrett shrugged. "That's standard language." "Is it?" I tilted my head. "Because Brennan died on February 6th. I've been back in the U.S. since February 10th, so I'm well within the 90-day window, which means you don't get the money." Garrett's jaw tightened. "What are you trying to say, Corinne?" "I'm saying you were counting on me being in Germany when Brennan died. You thought I wouldn't make it back in time to file the claim. You thought the money would default to you." Fallon shifted her weight. I saw her hands trembling. "That's crazy," Garrett said, but his voice had lost its warmth. "Is it?" I leaned forward. "Because the FBI knows about the money you embezzled from TechWave, $150,000 laundered through Mom and Dad's joint checking account. They know you forged Dad's signature. They know you used deep fake voice software to authorize the transfers." Garrett stood up abruptly. "You went to the FBI." "Yes." "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice rising. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know everything," I said, standing to face him. "I have Brennan's USB drive. I have the email he sent. I have the receipts for the arsenic you bought. I have the video of you and Fallon in your car talking about poisoning him." Garrett's face went white. Fallon made a small, strangled sound. "The FBI knows about the mafia debt." I continued. "They know you owed $280,000. They know you killed Brennan to collect the insurance money and pay them off." For a moment, no one moved. Then Garrett turned sharply to Fallon. "Do it," he hissed. Fallon's eyes went wide. She shook her head. "Garrett, no." "Do it," he shouted. Fallon reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out an 8-inch kitchen knife. The blade caught the light. She held it awkwardly like she'd never held a weapon before. Tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Corinne, I'm so sorry. My son, they're going to kill my son if I don't. I don't have a choice." "FBI, drop the weapon, drop it now." The front door exploded inward. Special Agent Voss burst through, first gun drawn, 2 agents flanking him. The back door crashed open simultaneously, Tessa Lang and Cruz Hamilton, tactical vests, weapons raised. FBI, hands in the air. Everything happened in seconds. Fallon screamed and swung the knife toward me. I stepped inside her Reach Air Force close combat training drilled into muscle memory, grabbed her wrist, twisted hard, and stripped the knife from her hand. It clattered to the floor. She collapsed, sobbing. Garrett bolted toward the hallway. I pivoted and kicked him hard in the back of the knee. He went down with a grunt, hand slamming against the hardwood. "Don't move!" Voss shouted, his gun trained on Garrett. "Hands behind your head, now!" Garrett didn't move. Cruz was on him in 2 strides, wrenching his arms back and snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Tessa did the same to Fallon, who didn't resist, just curled on the floor, crying. Voss holstered his weapon and stepped toward me. "You okay?" I nodded, breathing hard. My left hand was bleeding a shallow scratch along the back about 4 centimeters long where Fallon's fingernails had caught me during the struggle. I hadn't even felt it happen. Voss looked at Garrett, still face down on the floor. "Garrett Calloway, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." He turned to Fallon. "Fallon Calloway, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and administering a controlled substance with intent to kill." 2 more agents entered and hauled Garrett to his feet. He looked at me, his face twisted with rage. "You bitch! You set me up." "Yeah," I said quietly. "I did." They dragged him out. Fallon was next, still sobbing, barely able to walk. As she passed me, she whispered, "Please tell Evan I'm sorry. Tell him I love him." I didn't answer. The house emptied. Voss stayed behind, along with Tessa, who handed me a gauze pad for my hand. I pressed it against the scratch and watched the red seep through. "You did good," Voss said. I looked at the overturned chair, the knife on the floor, the scuff marks where Garrett had fallen. My brother, my sister-in-law, gone. "I don't feel anything," I said. "You will," Voss replied. "Later. Right now you're in shock." I nodded. My hand wasn't bleeding much. The cut was shallow. But I stared at it anyway, at the thin line of red against my skin, and felt nothing. Empty. That was the word. I felt empty. 6 weeks later, I sat in the front row of courtroom 412 at the Multnomah County Courthouse, a gray stone building on Southwest 3rd Avenue in downtown Portland. The room smelled like old wood and floor polish. Garrett and Fallon sat at separate defense tables, each flanked by attorneys. Garrett wore a dark suit, his face blank. Fallon looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched, hands folded in her lap. Judge Evelyn Hargrove, a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, presided from the bench. The jury, 12 Oregonians, 7 women and 5 men, sat in 2 rows along the left wall. Assistant District Attorney Simone Blackwell stood to deliver the opening statement. She was 44 tall and composed with close-cropped black hair and a navy suit. She'd met with me 3 times over the past month, walking me through every piece of evidence, every witness, every charge. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Blackwell began, her voice clear and steady. This is a case about greed, betrayal, and murder. The defendants, Garrett Calloway and Fallon Calloway, conspired to poison Brennan Mercer, a 41-year-old software engineer, husband and son, in order to collect $850,000 in life insurance. They administered arsenic trioxide over a period of 12 weeks, slowly destroying his organs. And when his wife, Corinne Mercer, began to uncover the truth, they attempted to kill her too. She paused, letting the words settle. The evidence will show that Garrett Calloway owed $280,000 to a Seattle-based criminal organization. He embezzled $150,000 from his employer and laundered it through his parents' bank account. He still needed more. So he convinced his wife, Fallon Calloway, a registered nurse, to poison Brennan Mercer. She purchased 500 grams of arsenic trioxide online. She administered it in protein shakes over 3 months, and on February 4, 2025, she injected a final lethal dose into Brennan's arm. He died on February 6th. Blackwell gestured to the evidence table where plastic bags held printouts, receipts, and USB drives. You will see video of Garrett Calloway confessing to the murder. You will hear testimony from the FBI agents who arrested them. You will hear from the forensic pathologist who performed Brennan Mercer's autopsy, and you will see surveillance footage of the defendants attempting to stab Corinne Mercer in her own home. She turned back to the jury. At the end of this trial, the state will ask you to find both defendants guilty of murder in the first degree. Thank you. She sat down. The courtroom was silent. The prosecution called its first witness Dr. Miles Whitmore, a forensic pathologist with the Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office. He was in his late 50s, bald, with wire-rimmed glasses, and a calm, professorial manner. Blackwell stood. Dr. Whitmore, you performed the autopsy on Brennan Mercer on February 8, 2025. Can you tell the jury your findings Dr. Whitmore opened a folder. Brennan Mercer died of acute arsenic poisoning. His blood arsenic level at the time of death was 12,500 micrograms per liter, approximately 1,250 times the normal level. Arsenic disrupts cellular respiration, causing multi-organ failure. In Mr. Mercer's case, his heart, liver, and kidneys showed severe damage. Did you find evidence of long-term exposure? Yes. Hair and bone samples revealed elevated arsenic concentrations consistent with poisoning over a period of 12 weeks. And did you find any injection sites? I did. A puncture mark on the inside of his right forearm consistent with a needle injection administered within 24 hours of death. In your professional opinion, Dr. Whitmore, was this a natural death? Absolutely not. This was homicide. Deliberate sustained poisoning followed by a final lethal injection. Thank you, doctor. The second witness was Quinlan Barrett. He wore a gray suit and looked exhausted. Blackwell asked him to explain the dashcam video. Quinlan spoke quietly but clearly. I installed a camera in Garrett Calloway's car because I suspected he was involved in Brennan's death. On February 4th, I retrieved the memory card. The video shows Garrett and Fallon discussing the poison. Garrett said Brennan will be dead in 48 hours. Fallon confirmed she'd put 300 milligrams of arsenic in his shake. Blackwell played the video for the jury. The courtroom was silent except for the tinny audio of Garrett's voice. Once he's gone, the insurance pays out. That clears the debt. When it ended, 2 jurors were staring at Garrett with open disgust. The third witness was Special Agent Holden Voss. He testified about the FBI investigation, the USB drive. Brennan had prepared the surveillance operation, the arrest on February 22nd. We recorded the entire confrontation, Voss said. Fallon Calloway pulled a knife and attempted to stab Mrs. Mercer. Garrett Calloway ordered her to do it. The surveillance footage played. I watched myself on the screen calm direct while Fallon sobbed and swung the blade toward me. On the 4th day of trial, Fallon's attorney, Rebecca Stone, stood to present her defense. She was young, earnest, with blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. Ladies and gentlemen, Fallon Calloway is not a murderer. She is a victim. Garrett Calloway threatened her son. He told her that if she didn't help him, the mafia would kill her 8-year-old boy. She acted under duress. She had no choice. Stone played a recording of Garrett's voice from the dash cam. If we don't pay them by the end of the month, they'll kill us. They sent a photo of Evan's school. She was terrified, Stone said. She's a mother. What would you do? But when Blackwell cross-examined, she asked one question. Mrs. Calloway, did you ever go to the police? Fallon on the stand shook her head. No. Did you warn Brennan Mercer that his life was in danger? No. Did you refuse to purchase the arsenic? No. Blackwell sat down. Several jurors shook their heads. On the final day of trial, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. My parents sat beside me, my father's hand resting on my shoulder. Quinlan sat on my other side, his knee bouncing with nervous energy. Assistant District Attorney Simone Blackwell stood to deliver her closing argument. She walked slowly toward the jury, her voice calm but fierce. Garrett Calloway and Fallon Calloway murdered Brennan Mercer for money. Not in a moment of panic, not in self-defense. They planned it for months. They purchased poison. They administered it slowly over 12 weeks, watching him grow weaker every day. And when he was on the verge of discovering the truth, they killed him. Then they tried to kill his wife. She paused, meeting the eyes of each juror. They had choices. They could have gone to the police. They could have declared bankruptcy. They could have asked for help. Instead, they chose murder. The evidence is overwhelming. The video confession, the toxicology report, the FBI surveillance. There is no reasonable doubt. I ask you to find both defendants guilty of murder in the first degree. She sat down. The defense attorneys made their arguments, duress, coercion, desperation, but the jury's faces remained stony. Judge Hargrove dismissed them to deliberate. 4 hours later, the bailiff called us back. The courtroom fell silent as the jury filed in. None of them looked at Garrett or Fallon. Judge Evelyn Hargrove, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, adjusted her glasses. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, a man in his 50s with a graying beard, stood. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of murder in the first degree against Garrett Michael Calloway, how do you find guilty? A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My mother squeezed my hand. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of attempted murder of Corinne Mercer, guilty. Judge Hargrove turned to Fallon. On the charge of murder in the first degree against Fallon Marie Calloway, how do you find guilty? Fallon's head dropped. Her attorney touched her shoulder, but she didn't move. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. Judge Hargrove nodded. The jury is dismissed with the court's thanks. Sentencing will take place immediately. Blackwell stood. Your Honor, the state requests the maximum sentence for both defendants. These crimes were premeditated, calculated, and cruel. Brennan Mercer suffered for 3 months before his death. His widow, Corinne Mercer, would like to make a victim impact statement. Judge Hargrove nodded. Mrs. Mercer, you may proceed. I stood. My legs felt weak, but I walked to the front of the courtroom. I turned and looked directly at Garrett. You are my big brother. I said, my voice steady. When I was 8 years old, you taught me how to ride a bike. When I was 12, you scared off the boys who bullied me at school. I trusted you. I loved you. Garrett wouldn't meet my eyes. You killed my husband. You poisoned him, slowly watching him suffer, and you didn't care. You framed our parents. You tried to have me killed. And for what money? $850,000. That's what Brennan's life was worth to you. My voice cracked. You're not my brother anymore. You're a murderer. And I hope you spend the rest of your life in prison thinking about what you did. I turned away and walked back to my seat. My father pulled me into a hug. Judge Hargrove's voice was cold and clear. Garrett Calloway, you orchestrated a cruel, calculated murder for financial gain. You showed no remorse, no mercy. You are a danger to society. I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Garrett's face went pale. His attorney whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. Judge Hargrove turned to Fallon. Fallon Calloway, you administered poison to an innocent man. You claim you acted under duress, but the evidence shows you had opportunities to refuse to warn the victim to seek help. You chose not to. However, the court acknowledges that you were manipulated by your co-defendant. I sentence you to 30 years in the Oregon State Penitentiary. Fallon sobbed openly. Judge Hargrove struck her gavel. This court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, the spring air was cool and clean. Reporters shouted questions, but I ignored them. Quinlan walked beside me, hands shoved in his pockets. My parents followed my mother, leaning on my father's arm. We stopped on the courthouse steps. My father looked back at the building, his face carved with grief. My son is dead to me, he said quietly. My mother touched his cheek. We still have our daughter, and we have Quinlan now. Quinlan looked up, startled. You mean that... My mother smiled through her tears. Your family, Quinlan. You've always been family. You just didn't know it. Quinlan's eyes filled. I pulled him into a hug. You're stuck with us now, I whispered. He laughed a choked, broken sound and hugged me back. 3 days later, I stood alone at Brennan's grave in Sunset Hills Cemetery. The headstone was simple gray granite engraved with his name and the dates Brennan James Mercer, 1984 to 2025. Beloved husband, son, and friend. I knelt and placed a bouquet of white roses on the grass. Hey, babe, I said softly. It's over. Garrett got life. Fallon got 30 years. They're never getting out. The wind rustled the trees overhead. I know you'd want me to forgive them. You always saw the good in people, but I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I traced his name with my fingertips. Quinlan's doing okay. Mom and Dad adopted him unofficially, but it's real. He's part of the family now. The family you helped him find. My throat tightened. I miss you so much, every single day. But I'm going to keep going. For you. For our family. For the life you wanted me to have. I stood brushing the dirt from my knees. Behind me, I heard footsteps. I turned. Quinlan, my mother, and my father stood at the cemetery gate, waiting. I looked back at the headstone one last time. I love you, Brennan. Always. Then I walked toward them, toward my family broken but healing, scarred but whole. And for the first time in 3 months, I felt something other than grief. I felt hope. Looking back now, I realize that family betrayal cuts deeper than any stranger's cruelty ever could. When Garrett chose greed over love, when he turned family betrayal into murder, he didn't just destroy Brennan, he shattered the foundation of trust we'd built over 3 decades. Family betrayal like his leaves scars that never fully heal. If you're reading this, learn from my pain. Never assume blood makes someone loyal. Watch for the warning signs: sudden financial desperation, evasiveness, coldness, where warmth once lived. And if you suspect something is wrong, speak up. Don't wait for proof. Brennan waited, and it cost him his life. I used to believe that family revenge was the answer that I needed to personally destroy Garrett to find peace. But family revenge only perpetuates the cycle of pain. Justice came not from my anger, but from letting the law handle what I couldn't. God gave us systems of justice for a reason. Vigilante family revenge would have made me no better than him. My faith wavered during those dark months. I questioned why God allowed Brennan to suffer, why evil seemed to win. But I see now that God was working through Quinlan, through the FBI, through every piece of evidence Brennan left behind. Sometimes God's justice is slow, but it is certain. My advice: don't be like me. Don't let rage consume you. Don't let betrayal turn you bitter. Choose healing over hatred, truth over silence, and faith over despair. Thank you for walking this painful journey with me to the very end. I'd love to hear your perspective. What would you do if you found yourself in my shoes, discovering that your own sibling orchestrated such a devastating crime? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect on trust and justice within families, consider subscribing so you won't miss future stories that explore the complexities of human nature. A gentle reminder: while this narrative draws inspiration from themes of financial desperation and domestic crime, certain elements have been heightened for storytelling impact. If this particular style or subject matter doesn't align with your preferences, feel free to explore other content that might suit you better.